Back, everybody, This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program today. Website thisweekinamerica.us. With us on the program, John Peel, author of the book How Far from the Apple Tree, a son in relation to his famous father. As I mentioned in the introduction, his father is the noted preacher and author Norman Vincent Peale. John Peel, welcome to This Week in America. Great to have you with us on the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be talking with you.
Well, there is so much to talk about in the program, and let's just start because when you mention to some people Norman Vincent Peale, they're like, yeah, I remember him. I mean, the books, the television, the radio, and others are like, maybe I've heard the name, but I'm not real sure. Just very briefly, who was your father? Because he was a major factor in U.S. media and in religion for a number of years.
Yes, for 52 years, he was minister of a church in New York City on Fifth Avenue called the Marble Collegiate Church. He wrote 46 books, the most popular of which was The Power of Positive Thinking, published in 1952. He and mother started a magazine called Guideposts, and he was a lecturer on the lecture circuit of business conventions of one sort or another, and he was on radio for a good deal of time, and he also had a television program with mother called What's Your Trouble. He was very, very active. He passed away in 1993 at the age of 95.
He had a great impact on so many people around the country and around the world. And and John is the only son, he has two sisters. And as you were growing up in the 30s and the early 40s, your father was very busy. He was just taking off with the radio program, getting into prominence because of that all across the country. When did you first realize that my dad is probably different than a lot of my friends' fathers because he is a noted national celebrity?
Well, I didn't know how it was with other people and their fathers. My father did become famous. He was becoming famous in my early years. And my two sisters and I had to adjust to a pattern where he left after Sunday services and came back at the end of the week after having done a lot of speaking around the country. And then he closeted himself in his study to prepare for the Sunday services, and then off he would go again. And so he was absent a great deal of the time.
You know, it's interesting, and the book is Just How Far from the Apple Tree, a son in relation to his famous father. The book is available, by the way, by title at Amazon.com. There were so many times when you're talking it's like that's a normal family, and other times when it's not like a normal family. I was struck in the one chapter in the book, you're talking about the role your mother had in the family, and she, in essence, was a gatekeeper for your father, including when the children wanted a chance to talk to Dad.
Yes, my mother took that as her role. She protected my father. Her idea was that she was giving him maximally good conditions to be creative in his work. And so she protected him, and she did become, as we call it, the gatekeeper. I remember once I was 14 years old, I think. I wanted to talk to my dad, like sons want to talk to their dads. So I asked Mother if I could talk to Dad. And she went back into their bedroom, and he came into my bedroom, adjusting the tie string on his robe, and said rather gruffly, "What do you want to talk about?" Well, what I wanted was to connect with him, and I could see that wasn't going to work on this time. So I said, "Oh, nothing. We can talk about it later."
Well, it was interesting as you talk about your mother, who was gone quite a bit, worked on a number of boards, was CEO of one of the foundations that your father had. And you said sort of jokingly you used to refer to your mother as maybe working in a lumber yard because she was dealing with so many boards.
It was an early witticism of mine.
You know, it's interesting. And you talk about that and the problems you had in trying to get close to your father. You did feel in certain ways close with him. The summers you talk about were summers that a lot of families had. You were at Sugar Tree Farm. That was where the family went for the summer. Talk about that, because you made that sound like that's where the family got together, and it was a normal family when we were there and together.
Yes, before 1952, when I was young, before the end of high school. We had a very happy family life. We had this small farm in Dutchess County, about 2 hours north of New York City. And we went there for most of the summers and holidays during the year, had a great time. Mother and Dad took us to special places where we felt really close to them, such as the Mountain View House in Whitefield, New Hampshire, and the Mohonk Mountain Cow's house on a ridge above the Hudson River. And we played games together, and we talked together, and more normal-like.
You talk about in 1946, your dad goes to school and gets you out of school. The school wasn't real happy about it, but you had a chance to go see I think it was a playoff game, wasn't it? The Dodgers and the Cardinals at Ebbets Field. That's a dad that you could relate to. He's taking me out of school so I can go to a ball game.
This was the last game of the 1946 pennant between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Brooklyn Dodgers. And my father went to Mr. Alexander Prince, the principal of our school, and argued that if my sister Maggie and I could be excused, this would contribute to our education. He, of course, was very skeptical about this, but Dad sweet talked him into it. And we went to the ballpark. We ate popcorn, hot dogs. We yelled and screamed and had a great time. And it was just like two kids with their father.
That really created memories, and sometimes schools need to take that into account. I've been through similar situations with taking our kids out of school, that actually created a lasting memory that you vividly write about in the book. And our guest on the program today is John Peele, son of noted preacher and author Norman Vincent Peale. Just How Far from the Apple Tree is John's book, a son in relation to his famous father. You can find it at Amazon.com by title. There's an area where you talk about mood swings and you talk about anger. And there was a time, I believe it's with your wife's sister, that you felt bad afterwards, but you really lost your temper at that particular point in time. And your sister said, "What did our parents do to us?" And that's an interesting question. What did your parents do to you?
Yes, that is a very interesting question. I got a whole range of emotions as I was growing up, pretty much beginning with college years. I was frustrated, I was disappointed, I wondered what was going on, that I couldn't have personal contact with my dad on an emotional level. I got more than frustrated and more than disappointed. I felt an anger that really shouldn't be. And it sort of ate away at me, this anger. And so Maggie was asking, how did our parents treat us in such a way that we get like this? I don't have an answer to that question, except the way I put it in the book is a description of family life as it affected me and my dad.
Was there a period, and you talk early with the problems you talked about when you were 14 and literally had to make an appointment to talk to your dad. Did things really take a turn for the worse in terms of the relationship when you went off to college? You were a college, I believe, that your father wasn't all that excited about, a theological seminary. You were trying to determine, do I want to be a minister? Do I want to be a professor? Is that when things sort of came to a head?
Yes, it was in 1960, and I chose, for some reason, to go to Union Theological Seminary in New York City, a fine seminary with distinguished faculty and an excellent reputation. And Dad did not like this. He asked friends of his to take me to lunch and try to persuade me not to go there. And I remember this is on the heavy side, he wrote me a letter just before I was to go into the seminary. He said, "Dear John, I cannot understand why you are going into the seat of my most implacable enemies. Love, Dad." But I did go into the seminary. I did well there, and he and I did okay in our relationship, even though there was that big difference.
And politically, there was a difference. You talk in the book, Just How Far from the Apple Tree, a son in relation to his famous father, in this case, the famous father, Norman Vincent Peale, noted author and preacher. His book, The Power of Positive Thinking, still shapes the lives of many people all across the world. Was there a time politically when you realized I'm different than my dad? You talk about voting for Nixon the first time out, and that was sort of like when you made the break. And Nixon was a close personal friend of your father.
That's right. In 1960, I voted for Mr. Nixon over John Kennedy. I was under the influence of my parents, and later, Dad and Nixon continued to be close. There was one difficult time between me and my dad that concerned Mr. Nixon when he invited Dad to be a pastor to the boys in Vietnam. And I suggested to him that if he went on that trip, he would be giving approval, tacit approval to Nixon's policies, and he said, no, I wouldn't, and I said, yes, you would, and our voices raised it against each other. And Mother came into the room and said to me, you will not talk to your father like that. And I said, I still like this. I think Dad liked this too. I said, I'll talk to my father any damn way I please.
A little defiance there. Your dad had to like that. Go, yeah, okay, maybe he didn't express it, but he's thinking, okay, that's my boy. I like that. Just How Far from the Apple Tree is set in relation to his famous father, John Peel, our guest on the program. The book is available at Amazon. Rapidly running out of time on the program. There were several times that you actually tried to reach out, made that effort to reach out to your father, and one really had mixed emotions for you. That was the 40th anniversary of your father being minister at the Marble Collegiate Church, where you said some very nice things, and you were able to express that. And your father, you talk about, maybe for one of the few times, expressed his love for you, but it was done in a public setting as opposed to just the two of you expressing those feelings.
Aside from everything else I felt, I loved my dad. I always have and always will. I respected him, and when I was a boy in the church, I looked up to him and was inspired by his preaching and his conducting of services. And it meant a great deal to me to speak on the occasion. I think it was the 25th anniversary, the 40th anniversary, and especially at his funeral, which these days they call a celebration of the life of service. And I decided on these events that I was going to prepare a real good speech and speak in the way that he would speak, and did really well, and at least on the public level, we were close.
The book is Just How Far from the Apple Tree, a set in relation to his famous father. You went through so much in your life, battling cancer a number of times, depression, alcoholism, heart issues, and now you're doing well, you're retired, enjoying life. At what point in your life did you go, you know, I'm John Peel, and I'm okay with that. I'm really happy who I am?
Quite recently. Around or the early 21st century, maybe 2004, something like that, and it's got so much improved. I feel like I've come from the darkness of the state you described, of depression and alcoholism, into the sunlight of the spirit by being very active in the program of the 12-step program that I'm involved in. And Lydia and my wife and I are having a wonderful retirement. We're active, productive, doing what we want to do. And I don't worry so much anymore about my dad.
Is that sort of the lesson that you would like to teach to people who grow up, and not necessarily with a father of the prominence of yours, but those who grow up with a famous father in a particular industry, a school teacher, and you're expected to mirror a son of a minister? To not give up hope, to find out who you are and develop your own identity. We got about a minute left in the program.
Yes, that's right. I feel that my story, which is a story about me, but it can be a story about lots of other people who have fathers who were preoccupied with their own work, who didn't open up, who were absent a lot, and who was sort of like Dad was to me. It doesn't really matter whether they're famous or not. And the way I've gone through these difficulties that you described and that come out of them might be an inspiration to other people. That's what I'm hoping it will be.
Well, the book it's called Just How Far from the Apple Tree, A Son in Relation to His Famous Father, available by title at Amazon.com. John Peele has been our guest on the program. John, a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
This time has seemed to pass very rapidly.
Very quickly.